Here's something that sounds like a good deal until you think about it too much. For about $12 a month, you can listen to virtually every song ever recorded, any artist, any album, any era, instantly, from your phone while standing in line for coffee. That's objectively insane in the best possible way. So why do so many musicians feel like they're invisible? That's the question this video is actually about. Not streaming royalties, which is an important conversation, but it's not the whole story. The deeper thing is what happens to music and to the relationship between artists and listeners when music becomes infinite. Because infinite sounds like a paradise, and in some ways it is, but infinity does something strange to value. Once you see it, as the cliche goes, I don't think you'll be able to unsee it. So let's talk about how we got here, because this didn't happen overnight. Before Spotify, before Napster, before every song in the world lived in a rectangle in your pocket, there was already a smaller revolution happening. Portable music. The Sony Walkman started this shift in the early 80s. Music became private, headphone-sized, and mobile, which horrified anyone who believed music was supposed to involve proper speakers, deep bass, and at least one piece of heavy furniture. And to be fair, they had a point. You're not getting the bass in your chest through those tiny foam earbuds. You're not sitting in the sweet spot between two carefully positioned speakers, and you're not dimming the lights or experiencing music as some sacred ritual involving gorgeous walnut veneer and maybe a glass of something. The Walkman gave people something different: privacy, mobility, and control. And you could take music anywhere, and that changed listening, made it more personal, more intimate, and yes, maybe more compromised. But here's the pattern that keeps repeating. Convenience wins over purity, every time. Audiophiles complain, normal people choose convenience. The compromised version becomes normal, then a new compromised version arrives, and the people who love the old version become the new audiophiles that complain about that. This is basically the entire history of media. So in the late 1990s, the next shift arrived, and this one was different in kind, not just degree: Napster. Because up to this point, even with Walkmans and portable CD players, music still had a physical relationship to the world. It lived on a thing: a record, a tape, a disc, a shelf, a collection. You could hold it, lend it, lose it, scratch it. And if you were a certain kind of person, no disrespect of course, you could obsess over organizing and categorizing it. Your collection could be a point of personal pride. With Napster, though, recorded music started behaving less like an object and more like information, which technically it already was. But suddenly a song could be copied, shared, downloaded, burned, traded, or stolen, depending on which lawyer you ask. But regardless, for a lot of people, especially younger people at that time, it felt intoxicating. Whether it was songs that were out of print, live recordings, weird imports, stuff you'd only heard about, or music no store near you would ever carry, felt like the walls had fallen down. You could get it. Personally, I learned all kinds of things about college a cappella from Napster. But it was also chaotic, often illegal, and caused enormous lawsuits. Metallica got very upset. Everyone learned the word piracy again. But now, instead of eye patches, it involved college dorm rooms and lots of dial-up connections. But underneath all that controversy was the bigger shift. The album was becoming a file. This is hard to explain now because we live so deep inside the access model that owning music doesn't seem important anymore. But owning music used to shape the relationship. When you bought a record or a cassette or a CD, you made a choice. You spent money, you brought it home, you played it. You probably played it again, even if you weren't sure you liked it, because you already paid for it. And spite is a powerful listening strategy. You learned the deep cuts just because they were there. You read the liner notes. You noticed who played bass. You formed a relationship not just with a song, but with an object, an artist, an album. Each one was a little self-contained world. This wasn't always sunshine and roses, though. Sometimes you bought the album, realized only one song was good, and learned an important financial lesson. But the point is, music had friction, and friction's not always bad. Friction can create a tension. When something costs money, if it takes effort or it takes up space on a shelf, you treat it differently. Napster blew the friction away, and that left the music industry with a very uncomfortable question. What should a file cost? They didn't answer it well either, at all, which is somewhat excusable because the answer people really wanted was it shouldn't cost anything. And that's not a great business model unless you're selling venture capital. Anyway, then Apple showed up. The iPod is the thing everyone remembers because Apple has a gift for arriving at exactly the moment technology is becoming emotionally usable and then acting like it invented the thing. The iPod made digital music feel clean, elegant, personal, aspirational. The messy folder full of MP3s became a white device in your pocket with a scroll wheel you could spin while pretending you were living in the future. But it was iTunes that made the 99-cent song feel normal. That was the biggest shift, because suddenly the album wasn't just becoming a file, it was being unbundled. You didn't need to buy the whole record. You could buy the one song you wanted. This was great for listeners, but it completely changed the psychology of music. The album had been a container, a statement, a journey, or at minimum 12 songs surrounding two good ones. Now the song was the unit. Easier to buy, easier to move, easier to ignore, and easier to delete. I'm not romanticizing the jewel case, but plenty of albums were filler, wrapped around a single. But when the song becomes the unit, listening changes. You start building libraries around tracks, not albums. Playlists become mandatory. You start skipping more. You start expecting music to come apart in pieces you can rearrange. And that prepares the mind for the next step. Because streaming asks a simpler question. Why own a song at all? Why manage downloads? Why sync devices? Why move music from one hard drive to another like some kind of medieval peasant transporting grain? What if you just had access? There were early glimpses of this. I used the streaming service Rhapsody for a while back in the 2010s. It was subscription music, syncing tracks to a small, non-Apple MP3 player, trying to figure out why a file would play on one device but not another because apparently music also needed paperwork and security access. Music subscriptions felt slightly magical and slightly suspicious at the same time. Then Spotify made it frictionless. Any song, any album, any artist, on demand from your phone. No downloads, no syncing, no paperwork. And once that becomes normal, there's no going back. Because once you're used to the idea that the entire recorded history of music should be available instantly for $12 a month, it becomes very hard to convince anyone that a single album should cost $15. The listener won, at least on the surface. The listener got convenience, choice, discovery, the end of scarcity. And I don't want to undersell how genuinely amazing all this is. The old world had romance, but it also had gatekeepers, regional limits, record stores that didn't carry what you wanted, and radio stations that played the same 20 songs until you wanted to stick a fork in your ears. So I'm not doing nostalgia cosplay, but every gift changes the system around it. And the gift of infinite access created a problem nobody quite anticipated. When everything's available, attention becomes the scarce resource. Think about how streaming conversations usually go. People talk about royalties, fractions of a cent per stream, artists getting ripped off, the math that doesn't add up. And that's real. That matters. But it's not the deepest change. The deepest change is what infinite music does to how listeners relate to music. When music is scarce, you pursue it. When music is owned, you return to it. When music's collected, it becomes your identity. But when music's infinite, it becomes easier to treat it as atmosphere. And I'm not judging this from the outside. I do it too. Focus music, sleep music, music while cooking, music while pretending the email I'm writing isn't slowly draining my soul. Alexa, play ambient on Apple Music. There's nothing wrong with functional listening, but when it becomes dominant, the artist starts to disappear. The song's still there, but the context goes away. The album disappears. disappears. The intention disappears. Music becomes mood management. And this is where Spotify becomes something more than a music service. It becomes a navigation system. Because once everything's available, the most powerful entity in the room is no longer the person who made the song. It's whoever decides what gets surfaced. Before Spotify took over, though, there was Pandora, and it's worth pausing on because it shows how quickly the models shift. Pandora wasn't quite streaming as we think of it now. It was personalized radio. You gave it a seed artist, and it built you a station. But what made it interesting was a thing called the Music Genome Project, a massive effort where actual human musicologists listened to songs and tagged their musical DNA. The machine recommended, but humans had done the listening first. Pandora still felt like radio. You didn't control it, you influenced it, nudged it, trained it. There was something almost charming about that. The system was mysterious, but it still felt like someone somewhere had listened carefully. Then Spotify said, what if Access itself was the project? Not just a station, not a channel, just everything, on demand. And with that, the unit of music kept shrinking. Album to song, song to stream, to playlist, to vibe. Once music becomes a vibe, the artist has to fight to remain visible inside that experience. Streaming didn't kill music, it made music infinite. But infinity is not always kind to meaning. A song can be available everywhere and still not matter to anyone. An artist can release music globally and still feel invisible. A platform can contain your entire discography and still never show it to the people who would actually care. That's the paradox of abundance. The more there is, the more mediation matters. And the more mediation matters, the more power shifts from the artist to the platform. And that's the setup for everything that comes next. Because once choosing becomes overwhelming, people outsource it to systems, playlists, recommendations, algorithms, autoplay, whatever the platform decides is for you. And that's where AI starts to make a terrifying amount of sense. Not because AI invented this problem, but because AI fits perfectly into this system that was already built for it. That's the next video, and it's the one I think matters most if you're an artist trying to figure out what to actually do right now. Subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops. Or maybe it's already listed right here. Party on, Wayne.